The sky over Zenthara Prime was a tapestry of arrogance, woven from the light of 3 violet suns that hung like jewels in the grasp of an overindulgent monarch. The planet's surface glittered with crystalline spires, each one a monument to the Vexthari Alliance's unshakable belief in their own superiority. The air smelled faintly of ozone and condensation, filtered through atmospheric processors calibrated to the exact preferences of the galaxy's self-proclaimed elite. Dr. Elara Voss adjusted the collar of her hastily issued diplomatic robes. Earth's delegation had only been granted the fabric after the Vexthari had finished upholstering their ceremonial furniture with it and stepped onto the landing platform. The wind tugged at her dark braid, as if even the planet itself was trying to remind her she didn't belong. Ah, the human. The voice was smooth, liquid, and laced with enough disdain to curdle milk. Elara turned to see a Vexthari diplomat gliding toward her on 6 slender limbs, his chitinous exoskeleton polished to a mirror shine. His 4 eyes, each the size of a dinner plate, flickered with amusement as they took in her simple, single-pupiled gaze. "Ambassador Krill," she said, offering the traditional Vexthari forearm salute. Shed memorized it on the flight over. He ignored the gesture. "You were expecting Ambassador Hale, the one with the credentials." Elara kept her smile pleasant. He came down with a case of interstellar food poisoning. Tragic, really. He loved the idea of being talked down to for 6 days straight. Kryl's mandibles twitched. How quaint. A last-minute replacement, armed with nothing but primitive linguistics and misplaced confidence. He leaned in, his breath smelling of something disturbingly floral. "Tell me, Doctor, do humans still communicate by grunting and hitting rocks together?" Around them, a cluster of delegates from other species tittered. The Cathoran with their faceted eyes, the Nyxandrians with their too many heads, all of them watching, waiting to see if the human would crumble. Elara exhaled slowly. "Play the game. Actually," she said, "we've upgraded to hitting each other with rocks. It's called diplomacy." Kryl's laughter was a dry, clicking sound. "Charming! But let us see how your wit holds up against the summit's first order of business." He gestured toward the grand hall, its doors yawning open like the maw of some great beast. "The new trade agreement awaits." The interior of the Grand Hall was a masterpiece of intimidation. The walls were lined with holographic carvings of past summits, each one depicting the Vexthari towering over lesser species, signing treaties that were little more than elegantly worded shackles. The air hummed with the quiet whir of translation drones, their delicate wings fluttering as they converted every word into the galaxy's 1,000 tongues. Elara took her seat at Earth's designated table, smaller than the others, tucked near the back like an afterthought. Around her, delegates murmured in hushed tones, their voices a symphony of clicks, whistles, and guttural syllables. She caught snippets of conversation, a chime sounded, and the room fell silent. His carapace was adorned with bioluminescent sigils that pulsed with self-importance, and when he spoke, his voice resonated through the hall like a judge delivering a verdict. "Delegates, welcome to the 10-2-247th Galactic Trade Summit." His gaze swept over the assembly, lingering just long enough on Elara to make his point. "Today, we unveil a new era of cooperation." A hologram flickered to life above him, displaying the proposed trade agreement. The text was dense, convoluted, a labyrinth of sub-clauses and conditional modifiers. Elara's linguist brain parsed it instantly. Every paragraph was a trap, every sentence a snare. "This document," Zyx continued, "has been crafted with precision. Its terms are unambiguous." His mandibles curled. For those with the intellect to comprehend them, a ripple of unease passed through the room. The smaller species exchanged nervous glances. The Vexthari had done this before, buried exploitation in syntax, hidden demands in subtext. Elara's fingers tightened around her datapad. She leaned toward the Catharan delegate beside her, a being with a crystalline exoskeleton and eyes that glowed like embers. You catch that bit about resource reallocation? The Catharan's voice was a low resonant hum. It means they take what they want. Funny. In human legal terms, reallocation can also mean redistribution. The Catharan's antennae twitched. Can it? Elara smirked. Depends on who's reading it. Across the hall, Zix was still droning on about mutual prosperity, a phrase that, in Vexthari, roughly translated to your suffering, our profit. The translation drones buzzed dutifully, converting his lies into every language but one, because human language, with its idioms and metaphors and playfulness, didn't fit into the Vexthar's rigid linguistic algorithms. She was about to break their entire system. The grand chamber of the Vexthari Summit Hall hummed with the low, vibrating chatter of 100 species, their voices blending into a dissonant symphony of clicks, trills, and guttural growls. The air smelled faintly of ozone and something metallic, likely the pheromone suppressors working overtime to keep the delegates from tearing into each other. Elara Voss stood at the human delegation's modest podium, her fingers brushing the edge of the translation earpiece lodged in her ear. It was a clunky, outdated thing compared to the sleek neural implants the Vexthari diplomats wore, but she had insisted on keeping it. Better the devil you know. Ambassador Krill of the Vexthari Alliance rose from his floating dais, his six-jointed limbs unfolding with the grace of a predator who had never needed to hurry. His carapace gleamed under the triple sun's light filtering through the crystalline ceiling, each segment polished to a mirror sheen. Here it comes, Elara thought. Esteemed delegates, Krill began, his voice dripping with the kind of smug superiority that made Elara's teeth ache. The terms of our new trade accord are simple. The strong shall feast, his mandibles twitched in what passed for a smile, while the weak kneel. The translation drones buzzed, converting his words into the various languages of the assembled species. Elara's earpiece crackled, then delivered the Vexthari's declaration in crisp, unaccented English. She blinked. Because the Vexthari's translation matrix had just made its first critical mistake. It had taken Kryl's words literally. Elara cleared her throat and raised a hand, her voice deliberately light. Excuse me, Ambassador? Did you just invite us to redistribute resources? A ripple of confusion passed through the chamber. The Cathoran delegation, a cluster of bioluminescent insectoids, tilted their bulbous heads in unison. The reptilian Vexthari hissed among themselves. Kryl's antennae stiffened. I said no such thing. Elara widened her eyes in mock surprise. Oh! My apologies. It must be a translation error. Your statement, the strong shall feast while the weak kneel, sounded like an invitation for shared feasting. You know, communal dining? Equal portions? She gestured vaguely, as if this were the most natural interpretation in the galaxy. The chamber erupted. The smaller species, those who had spent centuries under the Vexthari's thumb, suddenly straightened. The Catharan's glow brightened. The Vexthari's hisses turned sharp, intrigued. Is this true? Demanded the Cathoran translator, their voice a melodic chime. Are the Vexthari proposing equity? Krill's carapace darkened with irritation. Absolutely not. The terms are clear, but if the translation is ambiguous, Elara cut in smoothly. Shouldn't we clarify? For transparency's sake? The word transparency hit like a plasma round. The Vexthari despised ambiguity, unless they were the ones wielding it. Krill's claws twitched. Behind him, his aides scrambled, their neural implants flickering as they tried to recalibrate the translation matrix. But human idioms didn't fit into their rigid linguistic algorithms. Metaphor, sarcasm, wordplay, the Vexthari systems short-circuited at the mere concept. Elara pressed her advantage. If the Vexthari are offering to share their resources, that's a wonderful precedent, truly progressive. A murmur of agreement spread through the chamber. The Vexthari delegate, a scarred elder with scales the color of rust, bared his fangs in what might have been a grin. We accept this generous offer. Krill's mandibles clicked in fury. This is not, but it was too late. The damage was done. The summit's carefully constructed hierarchy trembled as smaller species, emboldened, began demanding equal terms. The Vexthari's reliance on their flawless superior language systems had backfired spectacularly because they had never accounted for human nonsense. Across the room, a single figure met her gaze, a K-Thoran translator, their faceted eyes gleaming with something like amusement. They gave the barest nod. Elara returned it. The game had only just begun. The Grand Hall of Zenthara Prime had not seen such chaos in centuries. Elara Voss watched, lips pressed into a thin smile, as the Vexthari Alliance's meticulously crafted hierarchy unraveled like a poorly translated poem. The chamber, a cathedral of gleaming obsidian and floating holograms, now buzzed with the frantic murmurs of 100 species, all because of a single human idiom. Ambassador Kryl, his chitinous face twitching in poorly concealed fury, slammed a clawed hand onto the podium. The sound echoed like a gavel, but the room barely quieted. "Order!" he hissed, his voice a blade of frost. "This summit will not descend into farce." Elara tilted her head, feigning innocence. "Farce? Oh, Ambassador, I thought we were discussing feasts." She gestured to the still fuming delegates from the smaller systems. "After all, you did say the strong shall feast while the weak kneel. Was that not an invitation to share?" Krill's four eyes narrowed. "Your deliberate misinterpretation is purely a matter of linguistic nuance," Elara finished smoothly. She tapped her datapad, projecting the offending phrase into the air. The Vexthari script shimmered beside its human translation, the latter hilariously literal. "Your systems did approve this translation. If anything, this is a flaw in your own protocols." Then, with a visible effort, he straightened. "Enough. We proceed to Clause 17b, Irrevocable Commitments." Elara's pulse quickened. "Here we go." The clause appeared on the central holoscreen, its language dense with Vexthari legalese, a labyrinth of subclauses designed to bind signatories in perpetuity. Kryl's voice dripped with smug finality. "All parties shall be irrevocably bound to the terms herein, without exception or recourse." Elara let the silence stretch just a beat too long. Then she frowned. "Wait, irrevocable?" Kryl's antennae twitched in satisfaction. "Yes. A term even your primitive tongue must comprehend." She tapped her chin. "Ah, but in Old English, irrevocable shares roots with renegotiable. The prefix ir, implying negation, of course, but the stem vocare, to call, to summon. So, irrevocable could technically mean to call again, to renegotiate." The room erupted. Kryl's exoskeleton darkened with fury. "That is not a fascinating interpretation," interrupted a melodic voice. The Catharan translator from earlier floated forward, their faceted eyes glinting. "Indeed, the Catharan language also recognizes such flexibility in terms." Elara hid her surprise. She hadn't expected an ally so soon. Kryl looked like he might combust. "This is absurd. The Vexthari language has no such, but human language does," Elara said sweetly. "And since this treaty must be mutually intelligible," she spread her hands. "Ambiguity cuts both ways, Ambassador." The debate that followed was a thing of beauty. Delegates from a dozen systems pounced on the opening, citing their own linguistic quirks. The Vexthari translators scrambled, their famed AI systems overheating as they tried, and failed, to parse the sudden flood of exceptions. Amid the chaos, the K-Thoran translator drifted closer to Elara. Up close, their exoskeleton was a mosaic of faint scars, old wounds, carefully preserved. "You play a dangerous game, human," they murmured, their voice a whisper of chimes. Elara kept her eyes on Kryl. I play the only game they've left me. The Catharon made a soft, approving sound. The Vexthari have used language as a collar for millennia. My people were among the first to wear it. Their gaze flicked to Kryl. They hate being outmaneuvered. He will retaliate. Elara's fingers tightened around her datapad. Let him try. Across the room, Kryl finally regained control, or a semblance of it. This debate is adjourned, he spat. We recess for one cycle. Use the time to reflect on the consequences of obstruction. The dismissal was a threat, thinly veiled. Delegates scattered, some casting wary glances at Elara. She held her ground, even as the Cathoran leaned in one last time. Meet me at the Hall of Echoes, they whispered. Third Spire, there are things you should know. Then they were gone, melting into the crowd. Elara exhaled. The game was escalating, just as Shed hoped. As she turned to leave, a shadow fell across her path. Ambassador Kryl, flanked by two hulking Vexthari guards. Voss, he purred, the false warmth in his voice more terrifying than any snarl. A word, if you please. She smiled. Of course, Ambassador. Am always happy to discuss language. His eyes burned into hers. Oh, I assure you, he murmured. By the time this summit ends, you will regret every word you've spoken today. Elara met his gaze without flinching. Better men than you have tried to silence me, Ambassador. Kryl's smile was a knife. We shall see. He strode away, his guards flanking him like living armor. Elara watched him go, her mind already racing. The Cathoran's warning, Kryl's threat, it was all converging. Phase 1 complete. They're rattled. Now, we wait for the overreach. Somewhere in the depths of Xanthara Prime, the Vexthari were plotting. Let them underestimate her just a little longer. The Grand Hall of Xanthara Prime hummed with tension, the air thick with the scent of ozone from overworked translation matrices and the subtle musk of Vexthari frustration. Elara Voss stood at the center of it all, the lone human in a sea of iridescent exoskeletons and writhing appendages, her posture relaxed, her smile just a little too innocent. Ambassador Kryl's four eyes narrowed as he adjusted his ceremonial sash, woven from the silk of a species Earth's biologists hadn't even cataloged yet. Dr. Tartarjet. Voss, he intoned, his voice dripping with forced patience. We require clarity on your delegation's position regarding Clause 117b. Elara tilted her head, tapping her datapad absently. Ah, Clause 117b, the one about irrevocable commitments. She paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough to be uncomfortable. Funny thing about that word, irrevocable. In Old English, it actually shares roots with renegotiable. Did you know that? A ripple of murmurs spread through the chamber. The Catharan delegation's crystalline exoskeletons clinked as they shifted, their translator buzzing with suppressed laughter. Kryl's mandibles twitched. This is irrelevant. The term is clearly defined in the Vexthari legal lexicon, which, tragically, doesn't account for human etymology, Elara cut in, her tone light. But since we're all about fair trade here, she leaned forward, her grin sharpening. Let's not split hairs, or antennae. The translation, AI stuttered. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the holographic displays flickered, the air filling with the sound of grinding processors as the Vexthari's prized linguistic matrix short-circuited. A high-pitched whine pierced the hall, followed by the acrid tang of burning circuitry. Chaos erupted. Delegates recoiled as sparks rained from the ceiling. The Nyxandran ambassador's three heads swiveled in alarm, while a Vexthari aide flailed, their delicate antennae smoking. Kryl slammed a fist on the podium, his voice rising above the din. Enough! This is deliberate sabotage. Elara widened her eyes, pressing a hand to her chest. Sabotage? Ambassador? "I'm hurt. I was merely engaging in cultural exchange." She gestured to the malfunctioning displays. "Though I do wonder, if your systems can't handle a simple pun, how can they possibly handle the nuances of interstellar law?" The Cathoran delegation erupted into laughter, their crystalline bodies chiming like wind chimes. Even the usually stoic Thalassian envoy let out a gurgling chuckle. Krill's exoskeleton darkened with fury. "You will regret this insult, human." Elara's smile didn't waver. "Oh, I doubt that." In the aftermath, as technicians scrambled to reboot the summit systems, Elara slipped into the shadows of the chamber. The Catharan translator, her unlikely ally, materialized beside her, his voice a low hum. "You playing with fire, linguist?" "Fire's useful," Elara murmured, eyes scanning the room. "Especially when your opponents are made of kindling." She pulled up the treaty draft on her datapad, fingers flying as she inserted a single, carefully crafted mistranslation. The original clause had been a trap, a Vexthari trick to bind Earth into endless resource extraction. But now, thanks to a strategically placed homophone, mineral rights became minor rights. It was a loophole big enough to fly a starship through. The Cathoran exhaled sharply. "If they catch you, they won't." Elara's gaze flicked to the still smoldering translation matrix. Their systems are too busy parsing why kneeling in human trade negotiations apparently involves baked goods. A Thalassian delegate deadpanned, "We refuse to be treated like plankton in a whale's buffet," and the Vextharis rebuilt AI promptly blue-screened again. Krill's composure was unraveling. His mandibles clicked in agitation as he hissed to an aide, "Find a way to stop her," but it was too late. Elara rose for her closing remarks, the weight of every delegate's attention pressing against her. "Ladies, gentlemen, and esteemed non-binaries," she began, her voice carrying effortlessly, "let's not forget, trade is about connection. And what's more connecting than a shared joke?" She paused. "For example, why did the Vexthari diplomat cross the road? To get to the other side of the treaty," she finished, grinning. The grand hall exploded. Laughter, real, unfiltered human laughter, rippled through the chamber. The Vexthari looked as if they'd been slapped. Their systems, overloaded by the sheer absurdity of terrestrial humor, emitted a final, pitiful whir before shutting down entirely. Krill's voice was a strangled whisper. "What have you done?" Elara met his gaze, her own sharp with triumph, leveled the playing field. They had severely underestimated the power of human wordplay. The summit chamber crackled with tension, the air thick with the metallic tang of overheated translation matrices, and the collective breath of 100 species holding theirs. The Vextharis crystalline dais, once a symbol of unassailable authority, now flickered under the strain of repeated system crashes. Ambassador Krill's mandibles twitched in a way Elara had learned meant barely contained fury. High prelate Zykes, his carapace polished to a mirror sheen that reflected the room's chaos like a grotesque funhouse, rose from his throne. The delegates fell silent, not out of respect, Elara noted, but the wary stillness of prey sensing a predator's misstep. "Enough!" Zykes' voice boomed through the chamber, the harmonics tuned to vibrate at a frequency most species found physically painful. "The time for games is over. The Vexthari Alliance demands unconditional surrender of all trade rights to the outer colonies. Sign, now!" A holographic treaty shimmered into existence above the central podium, its clauses glowing a threatening crimson. Elara didn't need to read it to know it was a death sentence wrapped in legalese. She let her fingers drum idly against her datapad, feigning distraction. Then she misheard. "Unconditional! Cinnamon?" Elara blinked, tilting her head as if straining to parse the words. Around her, the smaller delegates stiffened. The Catharan translator, whose name she had learned was clause, We, a joke head adopted with grim pride, choked on his own laughter. Zix's antennae flattened. Do not pretend to misunderstand. Do not pretend to misunderstand. Oh, my apologies, High Prelate. Elara clasped her hands, her voice dripping with faux reverence. It's just, in human trade agreements, unconditional cinnamon is a traditional gesture of goodwill, a spice offering to sweeten negotiations. I assumed the Vexthari were extending an olive branch, or, well, a cinnamon stick. The chamber erupted. The Nixandran delegation, their multiple heads bobbing in unison, began debating the merits of Terran desserts versus their own. A gaggle of Vexthari merchants, their tentacles fluttering in excitement, demanded to know if this meant all future treaties would include confectionery clauses. Even the dour Catherine, who'd spent the summit glowering in the shadows, were now loudly reminiscing about a rare spice harvest on their homeworld. Zyke's exoskeleton darkened to an ugly violet. This is sabotage, he rounded on Elara, his voice a blade honed for dissection. You insect, you think your pathetic word tricks can… Ah! Elara held up a finger, her smile sharp as broken glass. Now, that's interesting. In certain human dialects, insect translates to beloved scholar. Thank you for the compliment, High Prelate. The laughter that followed was a living thing, rolling through the chamber like a seismic wave. His own aides were struggling to keep their carapaces from rattling in amusement. The Grand Arbiter of the Vexthari, a being so ancient its voice was little more than a whisper of quantum static, wheezed out something that sounded suspiciously like, "Oh, this is delicious." Zykes lunged forward, his claws unsheathing with a sound like scraping bone. "You will burn for this." "Burn?" Elara gasped, pressing a hand to her chest. "High Prelate, are you offering toast now too? How generous!" The summit collapsed into bedlam. Delegates were on their feet, shouting over one another. Some demanding dessert menus, others accusing the Vexthari of hiding spice reserves. The translation, AI, still groggy from its earlier overload, began projecting nonsensical culinary terms into the air. Unconditional cinnamon flickered above the podium in 12-foot-high glyphs, the words twisting into a glowing, mocking monument to the Vexthari's humiliation. Kryle grabbed Elara's arm, his grip tight enough to bruise. "You doomed your species," he hissed. She leaned in, close enough to smell the acrid fear beneath his pheromones. "No," she whispered. "I just proved yours isn't half as clever as you think." The Grand Arbiter had raised a single, gnarled limb. The room stilled, centuries of instinct forcing even Zix to freeze mid-snarl. The words hung in the air, heavier than any treaty. Zix's mandibles worked soundlessly. His empire of words, his weaponized language, had been turned against him with nothing more than a homophone and a well-timed smirk. The smaller delegates were already clustering around Elara, their voices a chorus of newfound respect. The Cathoran translator pressed a data crystal into her palm. "For the scholar who outwitted the masters," he murmured. As the chamber emptied, the last thing Elara saw was Zyke standing alone on the dais, his reflection fractured in the dead screens around him. The Vexthari's aura of invincibility hadn't just cracked, it had shattered. The silence in the grand chamber was thick enough to carve. Elara Voss stood at the center of it all, the weight of 100 alien gazes pressing against her like a physical force. The air still hummed with the residual energy of shattered protocols, the Vexthari's once impenetrable linguistic fortress reduced to rubble by something as simple as human wordplay. High Prelate Zix's remaining retinue had retreated to the edges of the dais, their bioluminescent crests dimmed in defeat. The screens that had once displayed the Vexthari's untouchable trade clauses now flickered with garbled translations, their AI systems still struggling to parse the chaos Elara had unleashed. Ambassador Kryle of the Vexthari Alliance was the first to break the stillness. His chitinous fingers tapped a staccato rhythm against the podium, deliberate, mocking. "It appears," he said, his voice carrying the dry amusement of a scholar watching a tyrant's library burn, "that the strong shall kneel after all." A ripple of laughter spread through the delegates, low at first, then rising like a wave. The smaller species, those who had spent centuries bent beneath the Vexthari's linguistic traps, leaned forward in their seats, antennae twitching, eye stalks swiveling toward Elara with something dangerously close to hope. Zyke's remaining mandible trembled. "This farce changes nothing," he hissed, but the harmonics of his voice lacked their usual resonance. The chamber's acoustics, calibrated to amplify Vexthari authority, now threw his weakness back at him. Elara stepped forward, her boots clicking against the iridescent floor. "Oh, it changes everything," she said, soft as a blade sliding home. She raised her wristcom, projecting the revised treaty draft into the air above them. "Because this," the text shimmered, deliberately stripped of subclauses and nested conditions, "OSH is in plain galactic standard. No loopholes, no irrevocable commitments, just terms." The Cathoran translator, her unlikely ally, let out a sound like grinding crystal. "You've reduced their art to kindergarten scribbles." "Justice," corrected a diminutive Nixian delegate, their three mouths speaking in unison for the first time all summit. Zykes lunged, his ceremonial robes flaring like wounded wings. "You insect!" A dozen security drones intercepted him, their repulsor fields humming. "Not Vexthari models, Catharan." The balance of power had shifted in the span of a single, disastrous pun. Elara didn't flinch. "The Grand Trade Alliance," she announced, turning her back on Zykes as if he were already irrelevant, "starts today, and its first law?" She tapped her wristcom. The projection flared crimson. "Any treaty clause must be translatable into the simplest dialect of every signatory species. No more hidden knives." The chamber erupted. The Nixians trilled approval. The Cathorans slammed their thoracic plates together in a sound like shattering glass. Even the Vexthari's own junior delegates, those who had spent lifetimes parsing their superiors' convoluted decrees, exchanged glances of dawning relief. Only Zykes remained frozen, his compound eyes reflecting the scrolling text as if watching his empire dissolve in real time. "You ruined us," he whispered. Elara met his gaze. "No, you did that yourselves." Arrogance is a universal language. The reconstructed treaty gleamed under Xanthara Prime's triple suns, its signatories' sigils burning bright in the plaza's central hologram. Elara stood at the periphery watching as the Cathoran ambassador demonstrated the new ratification process to a cluster of smaller delegates, slowly, clearly, with no room for misinterpretation. "You should be up there," murmured the Cathoran translator, materializing at her shoulder. He extended a slender limb, offering a data crystal that pulsed with inner light. "Lexicon of the unspoken," he said. "Every linguistic trap the Vexthari ever wove, now yours to dismantle." Elara accepted it, feeling the weight of centuries in her palm. "Why give this to me?" His antennae flicked toward the plaza, where a group of young Vexthari scholars, rebels in all but name, were laughing over a mistranslated human proverb. "Because they will never fear words again." A chime sounded. The Grand Assembly's doors slid open, revealing a delegation in EarthGov blue. Ambassador Yis' eyebrows climbed her forehead as she took in the scene. "You," she said to Elara, "were supposed to observe." Elara pocketed the crystal. "Observation is just action in disguise," Yis snorted. "Tell that to the Vexthari." She nodded toward a newsfeed flickering above them. Zyk's deposition hearing, his once pristine robes rumpled, his voice cracking as his own counsel denounced him for gross linguistic incompetence. The translator made a sound suspiciously like a chuckle. "Poetic, no?" Elara smiled. "Ironic, actually." The one word they never understood. The human-centric ambiguity clause was now standard in every interstellar agreement. Trade flourished. The Vexthari Alliance had rebranded itself the Concord of Clear Terms, a humiliation so profound it looped back into dignity. How to collapse an empire without firing a shot. Exhibit A puns.